So some of you have been here before, some of you haven't. So just to go over how this works is I'm doing this series of artist talks for this year. So I think there'll be 12 altogether. And I invite an artist friend whose work I admire. And they could be any kind of creative. We'll be venturing into musicians as well, DJs, fashion, architects, visual artists. And so I asked them to ask someone that they're close to join them in the conversation. So we have two artists that you'll be watching them talk about their work. So you kind of get 2 for 1 kind of thing. There's so many artists in LA that I really want to support and that I think deserve a platform. And an intimate space is really nice to do that in, where you can feel free to just curse, say what you want, speak your truth, and share with other like-minded creatives or not like-minded. But it's creative. So basically, everyone that I invite is an artist or a creative of some kind. I don't invite gallerists or museum directors or critics, etc., because I want to create a safe space where we can have a easy and open conversation, share ideas, perhaps develop collaborations, and it's just more personal and non-hierarchical. So that's what's really important to me about equity. So I'm trying to create a paradigm in here that doesn't exist yet in the outside world. And one of the rules I have is if I ask a man to come speak, he has to choose a woman to speak with. And so I'm trying to keep things, change it up so that there's more equity going on. So I'm going to start by reading the bios of Virginia and Cindy. Virginia was born in San Diego, California, to a scientist and musician. Her parents encouraged curiosity and exploration, which spurred her to move across the country to attend the Savannah College of Art and Design at 18. In addition to living in Southern California and the South, she has lived in the high desert in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in the windy city of Chicago, and eventually landed in Los Angeles, where she is now growing some roots. Broersma, as we call her, used the human form to disrupt the power structures of the gaze and convention when it comes to the presentation of the body. Deviation and invention in the way she paints the figures acts as tools to remove the normal cues for beauty and normalcy. In thinking about how people, women in particular, have been represented historically, she has recognized how this has affected her personal sense of self. In her work, she manipulates the visual representation of a person to regain agency in how she chooses to present herself and the body. And her recent exhibitions include a solo show at Autonomy, an artist-run space in Los Angeles, and at Fermilab, the nation's premier particle physics laboratory in Illinois. And she has also been included in group exhibitions at museums and galleries and alternative spaces in Berlin, Tokyo, Chicago, New York, and the US, even in the desert. We have something up now. I think we just had something up out in Joshua Tree.
Yeah.
So, say hello to Virginia. And we have Cindy Rehm, who grew up in rural...
Is it Rehm? Yeah.
Oh, excuse me, Cindy Rehm, who grew up in rural Pennsylvania, where her first art education came through the experience of handicrafts and folk magic. The women in her family fostered a love of materials and appreciation for the richness of the process of making in and of itself. She credits her childhood with her ongoing fascination with ritual and the power of tactile memory. Cindy is a Los Angeles-based artist and an educator. She's the co-founder and director of Craftswoman House Temporary Residence, a project dedicated to presenting feminist-centered works in Southern California. She's a member of the Association of Hysteric Curators and former director of the Baltimore installation space Spare Room, Rehm is a recipient of an Individual Artist Fellowship in Media from the Tennessee State Arts Commission, and Learning to Love You More grant, I love that title, and a faculty development grant from Middle Tennessee State University. Her work in drawing, performance, and video has been shown at national and international venues, including Elephant in Los Angeles, Woman Made Gallery in Chicago, Lace in LA, Goliath Visual Space in Brooklyn, and many more. Thank you so much for coming, Cindy. Say hello, Cindy.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks for coming, you guys. I'm not used to talking with a microphone, so I'll have to get used to it. I also want to say, Cindy and I talked beforehand, and we are really excited to try to really have a dialogue in the way that we would normally talk about our work and have it be conversational. But we also really want to invite you guys to participate, just because I have the microphone right now. Feel free to interrupt or chime in, ask questions as we go along. We're interested in having the conversation with you guys too. So we'll try to create space for that, but feel free to interact. And we also we kind of talked about treating it almost like we're doing a studio visit here, and just how we would ask questions about each other's work, how we would present it, so that's all. Obviously. So this tiny picture up here, it's not sized quite right, but I thought I would, in just presenting my work, show you sort of the progression it's taken from when I first started painting images of people. I started doing portraits. This one is from a series I did, which was actually just kind of a series of things that I was playing around with. It was a process that I learned when I was going to college. It's an alternative monoprint technique where I used corrugated cardboard. I cut out shapes, draw a design, or in this case a portrait. Cut out the shapes, paint on them, and then press them to paper. And I had always been really terrified of painting portraits. I don't know. I didn't do very well in school doing that. Like the live models, I never felt like it was a strong point. So I had avoided painting people. So this was I did one piece that was a. Is there something I should do to keep it on? Or?
It just does that, and we just have to keep, yeah.
Okay. So I did this one piece that was a portrait, and I really liked it because it sort of abstracted the face. And then many years later, I decided to start doing this, trying out this process again. And I thought, I'll try it with a portrait again. And ended up doing tons of these. The process was really interesting, and as I went along, I became much more comfortable with painting portraits. My skills increased. They became less abstract and more, I guess, accurate. More, I was using photographic references. They were pretty much, I think they were all of me, because at the time I was living in Santa Fe and I didn't know anybody. So I would photograph myself and paint them. So I did that for a while, and got to a point where I was starting to really think about, or I guess I was thinking about it all along, but the stories that were being told by each pose or each expression. And so I decided I wanted to continue exploring that, but get rid of the technique that I was using, which I was kind of wondering if it was sort of a crutch, like, it looks so cool, everyone loves the texture, and so I started my next series, which I did a whole bunch of these double portraits of people where they're all people that I knew, had some relationship to, and I would sit with them and photograph them and have a conversation for, maybe an hour, and I would just take hundreds and hundreds of photographs. So it wasn't like a normal photo shoot, I don't think, where I would just be talking the whole time, and after a little while, the person would get comfortable and forget that I was taking pictures, and then that's when I'd get really interesting shots. And so I decided to do this series where then I would pair, two people together remove all of the other information. All of them had just white backgrounds. They were all the same format. They were 2 feet by 4 feet, so they're a little bit larger than life size. And see what kind of stories I could tell with just facial expression. And so I started thinking more about narrative, thinking about, is this a something in real space? Sometimes I guess the sizing isn't quite right if they were in actual real space. Sometimes they feel like they're overlapping each other, and how does that change what you think about them? Are they two representations of the same thing? Are they people that are interacting? There's so many interesting things to me about what the potential that you could do with the human image. And so I did most of these, at this point I had moved to Chicago, and I started working for an artist who was also a painter, and these are, so far have all been in acrylic. I worked in acrylic primarily for many, many years. And I was working on this body of work, and when I started working for this artist in Chicago, he was like, you need to get away from the photograph. It's, like kind of another crutch. And also he suggested moving back into oil paint, just to see materially what I could do, since it has such different, such different potential than acrylic paint does. So when I was doing this body of work, I applied for some grants, which I received to do my next project. So at the time, I'd been kind of like in the middle of this work, but also, I kind of gotten to the point where I really did feel like when I was making a painting, I was copying a photograph. I don't know how many of you guys paint, and maybe it's the same with sculpture, I don't know, but it's a technical skill. So when you get to a point where, I just became comfortable with it, and I wasn't inventing in any way or being creative, I was letting the photograph sort of dictate what I was painting. I kind of had the concept, like, oh, it's two people together, and I was still interested in that, but, the actual process of painting, I didn't feel like I was adding anything to it. The photograph was fun, I was painting. So I had envisioned, at this point, the grant that I had applied for, I applied for a few of the projects that I was going to be working on, was I wanted to paint portraits of women while they were exercising. I was, had this idea of just, I didn't even know exactly what they would look like, if they would be beautiful or, considered ugly. I started thinking about how we represent ourselves and how, I see women represented, how I want to be represented, why do I want to be represented that way, and the idea of the exercising was so, just full of issues, personal, and, you see advertising of women, in their, workout clothes, and ours are beautiful, and, they have makeup on, and it's like, who?
They're sweating.
Yeah, they're not, they're, of course, have a perfect body, and they, but there's the other side of, when the reasons for why women, exercise. It's double-sided. There's this capacity for, strength and power and, accomplishment, and, the negative side would be low self-esteem and, oh, I have to meet some expectation of, I need to have, toned abs, or, so I didn't know exactly, where the work was going to go. I just knew that I was interested in it, so I started asking friends of mine if I could photograph them while they were exercising. It was really weird to have, it's, those same issues. I could tell, I had great people that were willing to do this for me, but, it was strange because of the intimacy. Think about, if, I had somebody come to my apartment, because my studio is in my apartment in Chicago, and she's like, I don't really work out. I'm like, well, I have this workout video, I'll put it on for you. And so she's doing a workout video, and I'm there, with my camera on her face, they're portraits, and it's incredibly intimate. I mean, like, when you're at the gym, you don't make eye contact, you know, you just avoid that intimacy. It's not a time, you know, there's like this culture around it. It's private in some ways, even though it's public, and, you know, I don't know, it's so weird. It's such a big part of our lives, but it's also this, like, private and sort of, it's just kind of manipulated, like the image is, so it was all these things. I was really excited about it. So I started photographing, wanted to get a starting point, and I did a ton of studies. And then as I was developing the work, I started thinking about, so this is one of the first ones I did, this is me, because again, I was like, I should do this of myself first before I ask other people to. So this was kind of when I was like, oh, I should, you know, I don't know, rethink how I'm painting and loosen up, and you know, that recommendation from that artist I was working for to get away from the photograph. I mean, this isn't really effective. I mean, I guess it's a little, it's starting to veer that way, but at this point, I then moved to LA, and I mean, I worked on this body of work for a few years, and like, I mean, the same paintings, trying to figure out how I wanted them to be painted and what would tell, you know, a better part of the story than just like, you know, I mean, I wasn't trying to do like a documentary type of painting, so so this series of work was kind of like a transition of me trying to figure out what that looked like. And so there's, you know, most of them have a photographic starting point, but I started thinking about using the paint to abstract, you know, this combination of abstract painting, you know, relationship to abstract expressionism is kind of this like conveyor of emotion, along with the image. And I have sort of, I mean, I love these paintings, but I have kind of mixed feelings about them too, because mainly because I don't think that they effectively conveyed what I was thinking about. Other people, like, the first responses, they're so disturbing. And because when you start manipulating the face, people read it, I mean, and there is, you know, there's representational elements, so people start reading it literally. And so they read it as damage or violence, which maybe is interesting, but I was not thinking about those things. I was thinking about how do you paint and represent a person, you know, and kind of taking it literally, like with paint. I mean, it's smeary color, you know, like it's not a photograph, it's not reality, it's a painting. And trying to reinforce those ideas, like this is a representation of a person, it's not reality. But people read it as a literal image and like, oh, you know, like, what are you saying about, you know, were you abused, were you like, about, you know? And so there was so much distraction about that, I mean, I love the paintings. I mean, I don't know, do you?
Well, the thing is, whenever, I mean, and I think, like, seeing them, they seem very transitional also, like, in the context of your work. And so I think they can be, like, for you, they can have that tension also. Yeah. Kind of like you're trying to do something and they're changing, but they're not to where your work is now. But I think they're a really interesting passage. Yeah. And whenever you send me the images and looking at these, I could not help think about Francis Bacon. Yeah. Which, I mean, and I think there is this extremity of pain in them. Yeah. And like, as you're just showing them too, I'm sort of like, it's this fleshness, right? There's like this, the body is flesh. Yeah. And maybe flesh that's being disrupted or in pain in some way. And I do think, and like, I didn't know about the fact that they were coming from this place of exercise. So I think it's interesting because the turmoil in the figure seems more extreme than you would see in, you know. Yeah,
well, and I mean, I was interested in having the paint add intensity, which it did, but it was like, you know, way, not like, you know, a little bit more violent intensity. But, you know, I was thinking about, you know, intensity and like impact and power and struggle and, you know, but the initial, you know, I think read, it, you know, it was just tripping. It wasn't effective for my purposes, but I don't know. But I really like the paintings. But again, so I mean, I worked on these for a few years. You know, some of them I started in Chicago and they started out pretty realistic, and then started to break down. And I mean, I think this one is the one where I like really felt like I finally, like I was so sick of working on it. I was so tired of the stupid painting. I mean, it was just looked too much like me, and this usually is when I have like a really great moment. I'm so sick of it, so I put it away for a while and brought it back out, and it's just like I just have to like, just kind of like smeared a bunch of paint on the left side of the face, and then it was like that's when it started to, kind of come to life, and when I obliterated, because I didn't want to paint a realistic representation. But again, like figuring out, this was just kind of years of me trying to figure out how I wanted to paint. So, so this is kind of why I'm showing all of this work, because it's, I don't know,
it's interesting to see, because your current work is much more abstract.
Yeah, yeah, and so it took a while, I guess, to say that.
Can I ask a question while because you're visible in these, like you're saying, oh yes, sorry, that you're using yourself because you're available in some ways, but do you think of them as self-portraits? Or do you just think of yourself, sort of like, you're using yourself as the stand-in for the figure or for the body? Or do you think of them as self-portraits?
I think of them, I don't think of them as portraits of me, but I think of them as like reflecting my experience. So, I mean, maybe that's my own like silly perception, because obviously, like some of them you can obviously tell are me. But when I'm doing them, I'm thinking about, like, they're about image and human, like, how we represent our image in painting. And for me, how are women represented? How have they been represented? How do I want to represent women? I am a woman, like, how would I like my image to be represented? And, what does something like this, how does this differ? And I guess I think of it more as, like, a collective experience than like, I don't care if anybody knows that this is me, it doesn't matter, but that it shows something of like either maybe my frustration or my, I don't know, intensity, or, I think these have like a certain power to them because they are dramatic, and to me they're very beautiful in a different way. They're unconventional beauty, and like, to me, the way that they're painted is so beautiful, and maybe again that's me as a painter, but like, just like the colors and the juicy paint, and seeing the history of a person's mark, I thought that would balance out the intensity, so it kind of be this back and forth. So like I was thinking about it, I guess more emotionally and psychologically than like, oh, it's a portrait of what I look like.
Did your transition from acrylic to oil like help in the transition, the kind of deconstructing of the base?
Yeah, it did. I mean, you can do so much more with oil paint. It's, I mean, the double portraits that I did were really flat. I mean, people were often surprised that they were acrylic because when you got up close, they still looked painterly, but they were a very flat finish. They all had the same sheen. And when you get into like something like, with oil paint, and it did allow me to do more of this because it's just so like delicious. You have so many different.
It's not as fixed, right? It's
not
as dry.
It's you have time, and it's I mean after not working in oil for so long and coming back to it, it was like, oh, I'm an idiot. Like why, I mean, I had been doing work that was really flat in conjunction when I very first started doing those prints. So the acrylic were fine for it because it was all like pattern based and flat, and so it was just very different work. But for this, it totally aided in I think me figuring out where to go with it. So I kind of stopped thinking about the exercise pieces. I kind of completed what I wanted to, with those. I guess this is kind of a transition piece, because these did stem from photographs that I had of people that were exercising, but you can, I think, maybe kind of see how they continue to break down more, and the face is still kind of there, but, it's getting further and further removed. And starting to think about, I mean, for so long I just did single portrait. Well, I did the double portraits, I guess. But I don't know, thinking more of expanding what I was painting, and again, kind of keeping. I guess with these ones, I would say they're abstracting the portrait. For if people are really technical about the use, whereas like how I talk about my work now, I think of it more as invention with the form. But these I'm still thinking about head forms but really removing them from an accurate depiction and still trying to find how I wanted to paint the human image. I started thinking more deeply about art historical, ways of representing the human figure and kind of tropes and so I don't know, these may feel like a little, oh, that was tiny again, sorry. The figure in landscapes and, how women are, portrayed and just very, and recurring motifs throughout our history and, like lying in the landscape and lying on a couch and, bathing and, being viewed. So I started venturing into thinking about the figure, not focusing just on the portrait. But again, I think probably with those same ideas of like how do we represent ourselves? How has the human image been documented? And what does that say? And because painting is so subjective, it's not a documentary way of documenting our experience. So this one's the bather. So just thinking about bathers throughout history. It's just because everyone goes to a waterfall to it'd be lovely.
Are you still using photographic?
No.
No.
Yeah. So at this point, I was looking at other paintings, and I was thinking about, when I was looking at a lot of like Rubens and Delacroix, around this time, and just thinking, I think Rubens was just really wanting to paint abstract flesh, it's so lumpy and twisted, and the way that he paints bodies, and I think if he could at his time, would have just abstracted the body. But so this is still, I guess, me also. This whole thing is just me trying to figure out how to paint. But paint,
No, I was just going to ask you, with the faces, you started, the literal portrait, and then it progressed to this point. Did you ever do figurative, literally, and then go to, or were you able to jump from how you ended up with the faces? You jumped right to the figure in the same. In that way?
I kind of jumped, and when I started this one changed so much in the studio, and at times it did look more like a figure, because that's the other thing. Mentally, it was so hard to get away from painting what is reality.
That's what I would do.
And so I would try to, I'm going to be free and, paint, a made-up face, and it's so hard, because you paint it and you're like, that looks great, now let me tighten that up, and then all of a sudden it starts looking like a real face. And same with the body. You can kind of see maybe this is a leg, and I think that it was even more that when I first started it. And with every painting, even that I do, I'm always trying to find where does it still refer to the human image, that the people will look at it and be able to grasp that. But is it too much like reality, and have I not been, I guess, pushed it far enough into something different? So I kind of try to figure, and it changes, mood changes, how much that should be. So so this one I think was a little bit more, I think there was an arm that, was more, you could tell. And I tried to eliminate some of that, but again, leaving some of it. Let me see what else I have here. This one I did take, I did use some references that I took of myself, just to kind of help me visualize, because that's the other thing is, if you're making it up, sometimes you can't always know, I don't know, it might start looking flat because you don't know how to model it properly or something. So, you know, I took a bunch of photos of like my legs and arms, you know, just to, so there's, you know, sometimes like if it's appropriate, I'll still use a reference, but then again, you know, maybe I'll put it in and it'll look too much, you know, just, the trouble again, like this is what I learned from those portraits, is if you get too close to people being able to identify it, like, oh, those were a bunch of arms in the air, you know, then they start thinking about something specific, that, like a particular moment or scene or place, which may not be what I'm interested in. So trying to find a way to have people go like, I think those are bodies, but I have no idea like which parts or where they are or what, you know, like I kind of am guessing like, you know, oh, is it doing this? And, you know, so it's that kind of area of recognition, but, you know, not being able to quite identify. Okay, so this is the current piece. This one's in my show at the Lodge, if you guys want to go see it. But
It's up until when?
April 9th. These last ones, which are more recent, I was really excited about this series because I kind of felt like I figured out some things with those other work, you know, at least like got to a point where I was comfortable with how I was painting the figure, that I started thinking more in advance of what I was going to paint versus what I'd been doing, like especially with so many of those pieces, I kind of was working on them for so long, I would see at the end of it, like, oh, I've been thinking about all of these things, so this is what this body of work is about, versus this one where I had kind of already figured out how I wanted to, you know, I'd worked out kind of the issues, my issues of how I wanted to paint the body and people, that I really focused on more of the content, which was, many of these were starting from more personal moments of my own experience. So in that way, they're kind of self-portraits too, where like, in thinking about my experience of growing up and how I thought about my body and why I'm thinking about how we represent our bodies, like what's appropriate to show, what do you hide, you know, what are you made to feel ashamed for, you know, what are you encouraged to show and applauded for, and how all of those things I think are part of what makes like how we represent people. And advertising on Instagram, you know, like we all love to post great shots of ourselves, you know, not the ugly ones. You know, it's just so rooted in us, and I mean, I'm not saying it's like all bad, you know, but just all of those things that contributed to, like, you know, what, you know, who shaped like how I think about my own body, and like, you know, like this one to me is, you know, kind of bodies tumbling. A lot of these I was thinking about sort of in my adolescence, you know, as you're like growing and becoming aware of your body, and you know, your parents were trying to like shape you and protect you, and you know, my parents were like, you have to dress really modestly, and you know, like, you know, I had a high school boyfriend, but you know, we were very conservative, and you know, so like sneaking away to make out, and you know, or like be physical, or you know, like, you know, wanting, you know, what can you show about your body, and you know, what should you keep private, and is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Like, you know, do I feel ashamed of, you know, we all have bodies, and you know, just all of these things that it's like baggage that, you know, is kind of, some of it's kind of funny and some of it's really can weigh you down, you know. So I was just so excited about this work, because I'm like, this is why I've been, you know, thinking about how we represent people, and because, you know, we're reinforced with certain images, and how that actually affects our perception of self and how we want to portray ourselves. So, so this one does have some like fabric, you know, maybe clothing. I was kind of thinking it was clothing, but it can be interpreted however. But you know, tying in more elements from reality, but still having it be, you know, having it feel solid, but still invented. You know, so you get a sense that you're looking at something, I guess, real in a sense, but it's still not accurate. You know, it's not a real representation.
Well, it seems to you like you often talk about the idea of experience, And it seems like the ones that are more literal, it's like a picture or a representation of something.
Yeah.
Whereas these seem more like, and I think too, the energy of the paint is something that's happening, or something that's in process, as opposed to something that's static, that has happened.
Yeah.
And I remember you, whenever we talked about this piece before, talking to you about memory, and that idea of like, things kind of overlapping and maybe happening simultaneously. And I guess as you're talking to, you're mentioning, you know, male and female bodies. Do you think of these fragmented bodies as being male and female? Or androgynous, or?
Yeah, I think of them as androgynous. I mean, for me, it's, you know, I mean, again, like, I'm thinking about my personal experience as female, and it's very closely tied to, like, I think the way that I think about my body is so connected to gender. And, but I don't know that it's important in the paintings, you know. I think, I'm sure men feel the same way at times, you know, so it's not important. And, you know, that's another thing, is kind of removing identifiers, so that, I mean, part of it too is like painting an unclothed figure and having it be about the female experience, and not creating a painting that then continues to objectify women, because it's something that men are going to gaze upon, or whoever, you know, like, it's going to become part of that, you know, canon of just, you know, women being objectified and put on display, you know, and
Well, it's
you know.
interesting, like they're not even any torsos, right?
Yeah.
They're just extremities,
Yeah.
which are kind of more neutral in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, some people see multiple figures, some people think it's one figure. My boyfriend came in the studio and saw this, and he looked at it right away and was like, who are you making out with? He thinks they're all about me, he assumes, and, you know, I mean, how I was kind of thinking about it is they're all, like, from my experience, they're not representations of, like, a moment that I've had, per se, but they're, you know, my, you know, like, feeling about, like, oh, you know, like, having to, you know, growing up and feeling like I couldn't be physically close to, you know, I was too young to be physically close to, you know, my boyfriend or something. You have to do it in secret. Like, bodies touching and tumbling and interlocking, and the intimacy of that, and, you know, whether it's a positive or a negative thing, and just, you know, the experience of, like, jumbles of bodies, you know. I mean, people think of different things, you know, I mean, you know, but just, that's what I was thinking about. So, yeah, but I do try to hide, or not, I guess, go with those identifiers. Let's see what else I think. Here's another one. So this one's called Myself is a Bouquet for You. So it's one of them. I was thinking about, like, if you were to, you know, how we present ourselves for other people, and if you were basically to jumble yourself up to give to somebody, you know, just that idea again of, like, presentation and arranging yourself, you know. One of the things we're interested in talking about is the connection to nature in my work, and one of the things that I think about, like, with either organic forms or kind of keep putting in like natural elements, whether it's plants or something, it's just the idea of how we try to tame nature. And even with our bodies and our, you know, an easy comparison is our yards, you know, like these wild growing things, and yet we're trying to always sort of manage them, you know, like, you know, not having wild hair, or, you know, don't be too emotional, or, you know, just sort of taming aspects of yourself that are, you know, part of who you are. And we do that, you know, with plants and, you know, having indoor plants and, you know, like perfectly groomed in our yards, and how we present, like, that's the appropriate way to present yourself to somebody else. I think this is my last one. This one is from a photograph that, and that's why there's more, you know, these more actual real things in it. So, I mean, I haven't set any rules for myself. Like, I feel like, you know, I wanted to see, I painted it in much more close to the photograph, and then abstracted parts of it from there. But this one is based on, when I was in high school, I went on this fishing tournament with my dad, and I won. I caught the biggest fish, and so I found this photograph that my mom has at our house, and it's me, like, holding my fish. It was a really cold, rainy day. was freezing. And I'm not a fisher woman. I didn't win by skill. Like, it was totally chance. But I still caught the biggest fish. So, and then they do this annual tournament, and this community that my family was a part of, and then they do an award ceremony, and so where they were going to give out the trophies, and at the award ceremony, they were giving away the trophy for whoever won the tournament, and it was ready to be called, and they called this boy, and then they gave me the trophy for the women's division, even though he caught a smaller fish. And I was like, it was the first time I experienced, like, you know, discrimination and, like, you know, the glass ceiling. It was so dumb. Like, it's just, like, it's not an important thing, like this fishing tournament. And then they gave me the women's division trophy. And I just, it was really dumb. So, you know, thinking about just, you know, the female experience, like, of, you know, even just how we award, you know, like, applaud and acknowledge women's achievements, and again, it's not like it's an achievement, but, you know, it's still just, like, over such a little thing, like, just give me the trophy for the tournament, you know. So in the photograph, there's my cat, my black cat happened to, like, walk in front of me, and, you know, we have these, you know, this cactus, and I made up the trophies, but I just like the idea of, you know, I kind of painted myself in there a little bit more solidly, but then just broke it down to these kind of arms and limbs reaching for things that they may or may not get, and reaching for the cactus, and, you know, just things that will hurt you. And, you know, I don't know. And this was a super fun painting to paint for me because, I mean, I guess probably because it did come from a memory, and I just think it's really silly because, I mean, most people aren't going to know the story, and there's a cat and a fish, and like a fish trophy, and, you know, so I don't know. So I am thinking about how to tie in what I consider, like, the invented way, you know, that I am painting human forms with having it be an experience that people can understand as, you know, I guess that's the thing that I'm trying to do is, like, how to best, like, how do I achieve what I'm thinking about, not that everyone has to know exactly what that is, but are they having a similar experience, and, you know, maybe, you know, questioning some of the same things I am when they look at the work, or I guess maybe at least enjoying it, I don't know.
I have a question
Yeah.
about your palette, actually, because it seems like as the figures have definitely become more abstracted, but the palette, like the fleshiness of the color, and I'm just wondering about that decision, if that's like a really conscious, like the pieces that are body related still need to have that fleshy color, or, you know, or if, you know, I don't know, I'm just curious about that, because that has remained consistent.
It is something I think about a little bit. I mean, I think especially with the portraits, I was using a lot of, like, pink because I was thinking about heat, and it did sort of accentuate the idea of flesh almost to the point of looking muscly and, like, more interior, which wasn't really what I was going for. But I mean, I think they tend to be more pink. I mean, this one I think is the furthest I've veered, you know, like, I mean, when I painted it in, there's greens and purples and blues, and so, I mean, they are colorful, but I think they overall do still read, I guess, as kind of that pinky flesh. And I think, I go back and forth between thinking about it. You know, I guess with how it fits with each painting. This one to me feels like I was thinking about it with this one, so that you could kind of distinguish, you know, like maybe these parts go together, maybe they don't, maybe it's just spatial, and when I'm blocking them in, I mean, they're really vibrant, and I think they probably get toned down a little bit as I paint them, but I do lean towards this, like, really kind of pink, and I think I don't know, like this one I am kind of interested in that it does look like it could be more interior parts than exterior. But other than that, I'm also thinking about it formally. Like this one, it was more formal concerns and like how pieces fit together. And so I don't know if that answers your question. It kind of comes in and out. You know, am I like this one I was actually wearing a hoodie, so there's some white globs in there that were from my hoodie, but yeah, I don't know. I think the consistent thing is that pink cadmium red light. It's a really nice color to use.
Do you think about that you're painting white bodies as opposed to?
Yeah, I mean, I recognize that, and I think part of, I mean, depending on like where along this we're talking about, I mean, the starting point is usually from my personal experience, so, and even maybe a photograph of myself. I mean, with, like, I mean, I go back to this one just because it's the best example in this work of, you know, having some differentiation. And I guess, again, I'm thinking about avoiding identifiers, and I recognize that if the skin is pale or white, it's an identifier.
Do you feel like when you painted brown body that it would be political as opposed to just another experience in life?
Well, I wonder if it's exploiting, like, you know, just because I am thinking from my personal experience. I mean, I thought about like, oh, it should just like represent the rainbow of skin colors. I don't know if I have a good answer. I mean, it's something that I'm aware of, and I don't want to paint, you know, like, oh, this is a black person or a white person, and so
but
it's,
when you paint it as a white person, so but you're not thinking about it as white, but that's.
well, I'm thinking of it from my experience. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't represent. It's not a self-portrait per se, but you know, I mean, I've considered, you know, again, like with the accuracy of things. I just don't think they're very accurate. I mean, when you look at the paintings, there's, you know, a broad range of colors in the figures, aside from, you know, they tend to go like this more like hot pink, which I think is, you know, partly because I like that intensity, and, you know, in some ways the interiority makes sense of it, like preferring almost like bodies without skin. I mean, I've thought about that, but I don't want to, like, I'm also not really interested in painting something that looks like it's completely, like,
Skinless.
yeah, muscles and bones and things. Yeah, so, I mean, it's a weird thing. I mean, I don't know if that's a good answer or not, if it's, you know,
It's truthful.
yeah, I mean, I've had conversations about this with other people too, and, you know, again, like, because I think of them as sort of rooted in my experience. I don't know. I think that I feel like if I was consciously like, oh, I need to have, you know, like, this one should be a black body, this one should be a white body. You know, I'm not consciously thinking about it like that.
It's something that I actually, and we haven't looked at my work yet, and I don't think that I have any images that have, I think all of the images that I have are probably white bodies, but I use a lot of fashion imagery, and work a lot around issues of hysteria, and then there were a couple of projects where I became more conscious, like, why do I only have white bodies in these? And then I started including some dark-skinned bodies, but then I started asking myself, is it okay for me to use this dark-skinned body? You know, so I felt a bit of complication around that, kind of, and the thing is, it's like, I think, in my case, and I think whenever you're using bodies, and we've talked about this before, kind of raising this question, is like, is the work figurative? And I don't really consider my work to be figurative, even though almost everything I make has the body in it. So it seems more like it's metaphorical, or, you know, that's the kind of idea of surrealism, like it's an interior experience as opposed to an exterior experience. But there is that question, it's like, why is the body me? Not necessarily, but it's like, if I use a body that is distinctly not me, is that a problem? And I don't really know the answer to that question, and it's something I feel like I'm still trying to work out. Like, I don't know what the right answer is in some ways. I mean, and I think because my work comes from a feminist perspective, and I think probably everything I make is part of me. It's not, you know, but it's not confessional, it's not, but I feel like you can't, or I can't completely separate kind of my experience for the things that I do. That it's, you know, it becomes more, when you ask that question, it's sort of like, what kind of body gets to be, or what kind of body do you use to represent your body in some ways?
It's also kind of interesting, I find that you find it puzzling and curious that you are working with the body, but your intention is to obscure the body, and that it's representational of your experience. So it's representational, and like it's kind of puzzling, you know. And I'm very fond of abstraction, and I work with the body also, obscuring it in a certain sense. But my intention is always that you recognize that it's a body, even though it doesn't look like a body.
Yeah.
Okay. But here I kind of hear that you're trying to. I'm not exactly sure. I'm finding it confusing.
Yeah.
There's this sort of obsession to obscure it, yet represent.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's that's part of what I mean, and I want you to get that it is about or of the body. So I don't know that I'm necessarily trying to completely obscure it, but I am thinking of a different way of representing it. I mean, that's how I think about it. And you know, something we talked about that is something similar that we think about in both of our works is, again, using the body and how we interrupt or fragment or manipulate it in order to sort of disrupt, like here, this presentation of this person and their body. You know, I mean, there's, I guess, the criticism of, for example, feminist artists that, you know, are, when they, say they use their body in their work and could potentially become objectified again, this sort of like recurrence of, they would say maybe I'm taking agency, but there's criticism of like, oh, it's becoming another material that, you know, you're still being objectified, or, you know. And I mean, I'm not necessarily on one side of the fence or the other, but the idea of, for me, is to sort of remove, again, the ability of somebody to look at this and go, oh, that's so-and-so, and have the, you know, part of it is about power and being able to like identify or thinking about the gaze and like how, you know, you walk through a museum and women are objectified, and, you know, this is generalization, I don't hate like every, you know, painting of a woman or something, but, you know, just the idea of like how can I rethink, if I want to paint the human form, how can I rethink how it's presented, and, is it the same as just another image of another person's face or another person's body, and what does it say to abstract it or completely invent the forms, or manipulate them, so that you can't quite identify, this is their breast or this is their leg. Is it fat? Is it thin? Is it, I don't know. It's, to me, like, I do want you to understand that it is a body, but to not be hung up on, is this person beautiful or are they ugly? Are they, which I just think that's so much about what you initially see when you see an image of a person.
What you have here is so riveting, because you cannot identify anybody, but you know it's living, palpitating flesh. You don't have any idea of who's or where or when, but you're working on a language that will take us on a whole track, take us viewers on a whole track. And, I don't think you have to channel it into worrying about issues like that of skin color. I mean, here you're this sort of culmination of all of these issues on this particular slide. You've done it. You refer to everybody and nobody. It's experienced inside all these people, all these. With the presences that are here, it's something very interior and very vivid and unavoidable. Absolutely unavoidable. You've got us. You've got the viewer, and now your imagination. So,
Just out of curiosity, I mean, you kind of represent like two different perspectives. Like, does anybody read something different besides bodies?
I would just say that from the first portraits you showed us at the beginning of your long inquiry, through this, there's in every single one there is consistently the 3D modeling of the surface of flesh, usually your flesh, let's say. You don't seem to, you don't really go beyond that. But the sort of central technique and the central painting occupation for you seems to be modeling the surface of flesh. And then where initially it was in portraiture and all the details of getting that off the flat photographic page and onto a canvas, you've held that consistent. And in this one, which may be some of the more departure, it's all about modeling. The space behind it's almost like a landscape here, but the space remains modeled. It's all modeling of the surface of flesh, and that's if it's a 10-year or more project, that's been largely what it's consisted of, it seems to me. The other issues of the female body or different skin colors or gender or racial or other issues, I don't see any of that reflection or any experimentation in that. Even the question of whether it's female or not, I don't see that. I just see a decade-long series of projects that depart from the photograph. You have left the photograph as a reference, but you still are painting the surface of sort of the fleshy surface and some surrounding material, a little bit of cloth that was on a collar before, and now it's some other kind of cloth and some other surrounding depth, and you sort of stayed in that space. If you're to stay in that space, I just think you should be very conscious of that. It looks to me like exactly where this work is centered, and it is, and a lot of the other things that come up in questioning or in the description, I think have less to do with where the work has remained, or at least has been centered. At least that's the impression I have.
Yeah, I mean, definitely like with the modeling, I've stayed in wanting the place where they have sort of a dimensionality and a feel, like, just talking about the actual forms and having this play between, could they be like a real thing, like what, they feel dimensional, or the lighting's hitting them, and where do they exist in space? Do they have an environment? I mean, those are things that I think about, which I think that's part of what you're talking about is, how does this form that is flesh exist in this space, and how am I painting it? And I wouldn't say I've like resisted a more flat or like, imagistic way of painting something, but I'm interested in that it does feel like maybe it's, it has some sort of dimensionality, like it exists, like I am painting something that could be real, but it's clearly, you can't identify it, and, it's not maybe inaccurate, they are very painterly and kind of, it's part of the way I paint, but also, again, like I tried to get myself there to be also like a reminder, like this is a painting, it's not, a photograph of a real experience, it's not documentary in that way. And I guess I have talked a lot about, where, how my personal experience has formed the way that I paint, which people may or may not know or have any interest in. If anything, I think when somebody looks at a painting, I want them to be challenged by the fact that it's not, they aren't presented with something completely accurate and representational for them to have the power position to gaze at. It requires them to do some looking and some questioning about it, because it's not an easy read. that's maybe a looser way of kind of talking about my, you know, my interest in the work. So to me, I mean, I think that's sort of part of the essence. And it ties to my experience as a woman and how image and presentation of the body, like why I'm painting this way. You don't have to know that. Your experience with the work is going to be impacted because I painted it, and this is, you know, how I've, you know, the point that I've gotten to how I represent the form to give you that thing to look at, you know. It's kind of simple, or in the simple terms. I don't know if that was a question or a good response to it.
It's really a question, as much an observation.
Yeah, it's interesting. Is that a good stopping point for a break?
So we'll take a break and then I'll show some of my work
Yeah.
and we can talk, and then
Continue
maybe
more.
come back to talk about